Have you ever wondered what pro golfers do to test their individualised physical profile? In this video, I'm going to take you through the key movement tests that the pros go through to help understand their unique physical characteristics, what their limitations are, and what they need to do to improve it. Overall, this can give an insight into how they swing the golf club, their risk of injury, and how they can increase their overall performance. In order for us to measure objectively and more accurately how a golfer moves, we're going to use a set of force plates. Force plates are absolutely essential because they demonstrate how force is being applied by the golfer. This then helps create a better understanding of where maybe a lack of stability and mobility, strength and power is either being produced effectively or poorly. We can then take this objective information and apply a correct intervention of exercise strategies, whether that may be stretching, whether that's strength or power work, and how then that can help transfer better to the golf swing. So we're going to go through a selection of tests that have strong correlation to how the individual might move in their golf swing, and then how we can look at transferring some training principles to improve swing mechanics and vice versa. So we're using Dave as an example here, and we can get some data to help with his own game. So the first test we're going to look at is a really simple one called a quiet stand. This kind of gives an idea of how the individual can maintain optimal pressure between left and right foot, and if there's any excessive motion starts to happen. This is closely related to motor control and that refined movement. Obviously, if we looked at this in more detail, we could look at this in the golf swing, could look at this in a putting stroke. But if the quiet stand is quite limited in a general sense, that might start to show up something we need to look a little bit deeper into to begin with. So just going to put arms across the chest, and we're just going to simply just try and stand there while the force plates measure how much the pressure is moving both forwards and backwards in the feet and left and right. In an optimal sense, would see very little motion because we are stood just dead still. But a lot of people will struggle with this movement. So straight away, as we can see, the dots or the pressure patterns has pretty much not moved. So straight away, as we can see by the test results, although there doesn't look like there's any motion happening, and this is why we measure force over just visual movement, because force is internal and we can't see that force, you can see that straight away the left side is produced over 30% more motion than the right side. So this can start to show up questions of potentially what's happening there. And when we look at that into a really refined motor pattern, like something like putting, that could then have a serious impact on the impact with the ball and face control. So the second test, we're going to look at single leg strength and stability. This is a really key exercise because it gives us a clear idea of potential lack of stability for the ankle, knee and hip, or as a combination of all three, and how that lower limb starts to function. Obviously, we need to interact with the ground, so the stability and the strength in the lower half is absolutely essential to both keeping stable and how that stabilizes the club head, but also then how that produces power and speed through the ground. With this exercise, a lot of golfers can struggle with because they just don't have the balance to first and foremost do this, and then they don't have any stability to even get into a range of motion that classifies as a squat. So that in itself, without even really doing the test, can highlight some key areas. So Dave's now going to do 5 reps on each leg. Aim of this is not about balance, but obviously we need to try and feel like we get good range of motion to be able to power up and see what the recordings show. So if Dave, you crack on 5 on each side under your own time, feel like you get good range of motion on the way down, move a bit quicker down and up. So straight away, when we're looking at 2 key metrics here, we're looking at the range of motion, how much depth is achieved, and then how much force is produced on the way up. Sometimes you can create equal amount of force on both sides, but if one side's going much lower compared to the other, logically that's having to create more force to get up, so that will actually be the better side. With Dave's results, left side basically produced exactly the same amount of force as right side, and with pretty much the exact same range of motion. If anything, right side was slightly deeper, but not of any relevance. And overall, both legs produced the same amount of power output. So when we're looking at this from just a single leg, lower limb movement capacity, there is nothing of concern here, and we can move on to some more explosive type motions. So the next test, which is one of the most common and important tests we can measure on force plates, is something called a counter movement jump, where we're measuring positive takeoff impulse. Now that sounds quite heavy, but really in short, there's a huge correlation from the biomechanics of the golf swing, which is In that transition, we see the longer hitters be able to, they're pulling on the handle of the club while pushing into the ground. And then as they come through, they're essentially vertically pushing out. So that if you think about this in a smaller sense, this position here is very much a jumping motion or a counter movement jump, which is not obviously a really deep squat and then trying to load up. So the scientific research shows the higher the number in your counter movement jump, the higher club head speed potential you have. And if you look at the European Tour data here, we can see where Dave might sit from a physical component in this particular test compared to some of the best players in the world. So all Dave's going to do is 6 repetitions, because this is power output. We obviously want maximum effort with each individual rep. We're not measuring landing ability, so it's just trying to do the proper movement, get through the ceiling, enough control on landing so you don't kind of hurt yourself, and then reset. So if you give me 6 repetitions, let's see what happens. So as you can see, as the results show, Dave is producing 283 newtons of positive takeoff impulse. When we compare that to the DP World Tour data, that would comfortably sit in the bottom category of vertical force output. Now that's in some ways maybe what we'd expect, but that shows from a program and training perspective, if Dave was to utilize that vertical force motion more effectively in the golf swing, which can help stabilize the lower body, which can help produce much more club head speed and movement mechanics, a focused vertical jumping type training and throwing exercise would have much more correlation and crossover into his golf swing. So overall, that's an insight for how golfers should objectively measure key physical performance parameters. Naturally, we would assess some other areas, so like maximal strength through the lower body and some areas of mobility through the rib cage, the thoracic spine and the hips. But at the same time, we can kind of get a good idea of how a golfer's moving in those areas just purely from looking at their golf swing. Whereas with the force capabilities, we cannot visually see that. So being able to measure that and understanding the golfer's physical profile, we then start to create a bigger picture of how they need to train and then how they need to transfer that training into their golf swing from a biomechanical perspective. If you've enjoyed this, next week there's going to be a follow-on video that's explaining the exercises you can do to improve these test metrics. If you want to understand how Dave swings the club and how he could improve his golf swing biomechanics that relate to the physical profiling, make sure to watch this video next.